Welcome to the Inclusive Growth Show with Toby Milden. Future-proofing your business by creating a diverse workplace.
Hey there, thank you ever so much for tuning into this episode of the Inclusive Growth Podcast. I'm Toby Milden, and today I'm joined by Monica Mwanje. And Monica and I live quite close to each other. So I live in Manchester. Monica lives and works over in Liverpool, but we actually met in Manchester this year because Monica is a consultant within the nuclear industry, and she organizes a conference about diversity and inclusion within the nuclear sector. And I went along to her conference, which was amazing, by the way. So I would recommend you signing up to her next conference. And this is really a catch up after the conference, just to understand a bit more about Monica's background, the work that she does within the nuclear industry, and everything diversity and inclusion within nuclear sector. So Monica, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
I mean, that was just a really kind of brief overview of who you are, but can you just tell us a bit more about the work you do as a consultant within the nuclear sector?
Yeah, not a problem. So I guess to kind of frame it might be useful if I just share a bit of how I ended up in nuclear as well.
Yes, please.
So I ended up in the nuclear industry by chance because of a conversation at a careers fair that I wasn't going to go to until my friend said they would go with me. And then I ended up applying for a graduate job, and that was my entry point into nuclear. So I actually studied chemical engineering at university and entered nuclear as a graduate chemical engineer. And it was sort of through that role, that was my sort of first taste. Let me start again. So I entered the nuclear industry as a graduate chemical engineer, and I worked up at the Sellafield site in West Cumbria. And through all of that and through that role, that was kind of sort of my first taste of the nuclear industry as a brand new graduate, early 20s, getting to know sort of a new area, a new role, leaving the whole university bubble that I had been in. And from that role, working sort of at Sellafield, working for sort of that owner-operator company, I also got touches working with different suppliers and different supply chain organisations, and that sort of led me into working in engineering consultancy. So I sort of left that graduate job after a couple of years, moved out and worked for a range of different engineering consultancies. And it was then during that's when I got more exposure to business development roles, organisational development roles, which kind of led me into the path as to the kind of work that I do today. So today, how I work with organisations is I help them try and win new contracts, new business. But what I noticed falls into that sometimes is trying to understand the people side of it, and how do you sort of get the best out of your teams, but also how can you work more inclusively? So I get asked to consult on EDI projects, so equity, diversity, inclusion, or equality, diversity and inclusion, depending on which acronym you prefer to use. And I consult on those matters and work with organisations so they can sort of build it into their strategies, build it into their approach, and build it into the different things that they'd like to do.
So you went to uni, you studied engineering, and you started off working on the engineering side of the industry and nuclear. I mean, what in particular attracted you to more of the people side of the industry?
So being really candid, I'd say it's probably just reflection on my own career. So sort of over the years, I've worked in lots of different teams. So in the first team I joined as a graduate, I was one of the youngest in the team. I was me in this environment where there was people who were much, much older than me. We were all from completely different backgrounds. And there was almost this expectation that we'd find a way to make it work without maybe there being any real support around how you make some of those relationships and dynamics work. So I think from my own personal experiences of being sort of in that micro environment, but within a macro environment of joining an industry that's very male dominated, always stood out in terms of my race and ethnicity because there's not many Black people that work within the nuclear industry. as well. So you kind of have your team microenvironment, you have this macro environment of this industry you're working in. There's also the messaging around women in STEM, getting girls into engineering and talking about all of these things as well. And me just thinking about, okay, well, I've made it into an industry like this, despite the whole mix of messages saying, well, actually, almost like you shouldn't be here because there isn't necessarily that expectation when you listen to some of the narratives. But I thought, well, I have made it in here, but what about others like me who've also made it in? Did we stay? Did we not stay? And then I think about friends from other marginalized or groups that are currently underrepresented within an industry such as nuclear and thinking about, well, you know, why are we here? How did we make it in? Was it by chance? Was it through active engagement? Why have we stayed? Have people progressed? And then the other side as well, talking to friends as we start to move up that career ladder and really trying to understand, well, how do we work with different people? How do we lead in these situations? And then, being asked, well, we've got this recruitment issue or that issue, or, we need to bring in more diversity into our teams. That thing where people say we need this, but they don't really articulate what that might mean, what it might look like and how it might work. And having those discussions around, well, how do we actually do that? And I was just really fascinated by it all. So I did one of the things I know how to do best. So research and read and talk to people and just did some learning as well as a mix of informal and formal qualifications just to really understand how some of these different dynamics work in today's modern workplace. And that's what got me into it, essentially. So a bit of a long answer to a very short question.
I can see how that panned out. And I mean, obviously you're a consultant and you do a lot of stuff around like organizational development. You're not niching and specializing in EDI per se, although, I know that you do a lot of work in EDI. I mean, have you noticed any pushback now that you're trying to change the nuclear industry from the top down?
Well, I think it's just human nature, to be honest. There's always a bit of reluctance or just a curiosity when people come along and maybe want to do something differently. And it isn't necessarily always that there are people who object. It's just maybe they're unsure about what it means and what's going to come next. So the way I like to look at it is those who are curious, who will or are supportive, they just need to know a bit more about it. And my role is to make sure I'm clearly communicating with them what's actually going to happen, what's involved, what the desire is there, and what the intention is behind all of it as well. And I've been doing a lot of reflection on this actually, particularly with all different things that have been in the recent news cycle and all different things going on, and just thinking, well, sometimes it can be really easy to just be like, we need EDI. EDI is a good thing, but not actually really break it down and explain to people what it is. But also, we don't take the time to ask them, well, what does it mean to you? How do you feel about it? And understand how to better communicate with one another so that they realise at times we are talking about the same things. It's just I might call it an apple, you might call it an orange. Because I think things sometimes get lost in that communication translation, that actually it's not zero sum. There are benefits for all of us. I'm not trying to do something that's going to take something away from you. But I think sometimes that comes across in the narrative through some of the approaches that sometimes get used and adopted.
I use that quite a lot when I'm talking about making somewhere accessible for disabled people. I say that this isn't just for disabled people. You're making it accessible for everybody. And if we look at a lot of the innovation that has been designed for disabled people, the wider world is now benefiting from it. Not a lot of people know that the keyboard was invented for a blind countess in Italy to write love letters to her lover. And now everybody uses the keyboard on their smartphone and their computer, and that's just an example of how an innovation for a disabled person is now mainstream.
And I think when you think about it, so when I think about things like pay audits and pay gap reporting, there's benefits for everybody in that, because yes, it might yes, it might in some organisations highlight that there might be some gaps for different demographics, but also if companies are interrogating their pay data, their promotion data, it can actually show who is or isn't accessing those opportunities, and it gives people information to then do something about it.
And I find that doing something like a pay or a gap audit helps with transparency anyway. And a lot of people in organizations complain about the lack of transparency around pay or promotions and that kind of thing. So you're creating a culture of transparency, which helps develop trust within the business as well.
Completely agree with that. Completely agree.
Can you give me some examples of how you've positively influenced nuclear organizations to create more inclusive cultures?
Oh, big question. But yeah, I can give some examples. So I think it's the fact that with the whole approach in inclusion and diversity in nuclear, we don't just have blogs and articles. We also want to be more practical and interactive than that. So we do hold events. So you mentioned you came along to the conference earlier this year, and you know, we have events like that so people can get together, they can talk to each other, and they can have those, I guess, are they called water cooler moments or whatever they are, even though we didn't have water coolers at the conference, but they can sort of gather around, chat to one another. And it's sometimes in those moments when you just meet someone new and you're sharing ideas around some of the things that you've done. And those are the things that can spark that change, or because you've heard of something someone's doing in their company and you think, oh, actually that might really work well in ours, or it could be something we could take back with us and adapt. So we like to give and provide that platform for connection as well. We also hold other events throughout the year, but mostly webinars. We invite different people along who they've got their expertise, whether it's in, say, pay gaps, or it's disability, or it's LGBTQ+, and we bring them along so that way we're connecting the people who come to our webinars or our events with the people who really know the subject area, who know about whether it's particular enablers, particular barriers, and can provide those practical insights into actually making change a reality. And I guess bridging from the whole, we've got all the nice intentions, we want to do nice things. It's okay, well, how do I actually do that? How do I make it happen? How do I understand what's relevant for me and my situation and my organisation?
Absolutely. So, I mean, particularly post-pandemic, we're noticing a lot more people are working remotely, in flexible working, and actually, just because of technology, we can work with people on the other side of the world. It's very easy to have a very flexible remote workforce of specialists. What particular mediums or channels are you noticing that's working really well to reach people that are working remotely?
If you're enjoying this episode and looking to boost equity, inclusion and diversity in your organisation, Toby and his team are here to help you. The team specialises in crafting data-driven strategies, developing inclusive leaders, designing fair recruitment processes, and enhancing disability confidence. With a blend of professional expertise and lived experience, we are ready to support you on your journey. Reach out to us through our website at mildon.co.uk. Now, back to the interview with Toby and his guest.
So I would say I've found that we get good attendance at our conference, whether it's people turning up physically in person, even though you asked me about remote working, but sometimes people do like to get together in person just to come along and experience the event and talk to each other. But we do also have it as a hybrid option as well, so people can join remotely, because we appreciate not everyone is able to travel, and also it enables people to join in from wherever they may be in the world. We also find that we've got some good growth and good engagement on social media, just in terms of, I think, the level of anonymity people can have. So they can go look at something without necessarily having to speak to a person or email a person until they're ready maybe to take that next step. So I find that that's worked quite well as well. And we also have a newsletter. And again, that's another way in which we found can reach people where they are. And something we know we need to get better at is also asking people for that feedback around, okay, these are our communication methods at the moment. Do they work for you? Do they not work for you? And sort of take that on board to improve our communication channels as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I was just thinking there's some interesting statistics that you shared with me prior to this recording, because you said that your industry is primarily made up of 79% men, 21% women, and your events have got more women attending. And you're seeing a larger number of underrepresented groups, including disabled people and workers from the LGBT plus community attending as well. I mean, it just goes to show that actually people want these forums to meet together face to face, don't they?
I would say that. And I think being intentional about the space you create and letting people know they can show up as they are in the ways they wish to, I think that really helps as well. And I find it really so interesting because, as you said, you know, the figures from the nuclear workforce assessment show the industry is approximately 79% men, 21% women. Yet you come to our event and you think it's the opposite, that the opposite is true. And when you look at, well, you saw for yourself, you were there, and you look at the numbers and then seeing just who else was represented in the room compared to then the data we see at a higher level around the industry. It shows to me and it demonstrates to me that different communities are there in the nuclear industry. They work in the industry, and like you said, they want to get together. They appreciate these forums if they know about it and they have access to it. So it signals to me that more inclusive recruitment that reaches talent from wherever, from whichever part of society, can and does work, because I've seen it with my own eyes that people will show up and have got the interest and the skills and capabilities to be part of it.
Yeah. Now, the question that I ask everybody is, what does inclusive growth mean for you?
For me, and I think thinking about, you know, linking it back to the nuclear industry, which at the moment is on a sort of big recruitment drive. So there's a target from the National Nuclear Skills Plan, which predicts that by 2030, an additional 40,000 jobs need to be filled. So that's a fairly significant number, considering as we speak today, we're not far off entering 2025. So it's quite a number of people to find by 2030 in the next couple of years. So to me, that inclusive growth piece, that I guess, and sustainable growth piece as well, means you need to actually reach everybody. You need to go far and wide and reach people who might have been unintentionally excluded, who may have thought, actually, maybe this work isn't for me, or I need to be a nuclear physicist to come and work in the nuclear industry. To me, inclusive growth means actually we've got the job descriptions out there on the different platforms where people can actually understand how their skill sets, their experience can translate and contribute to the nuclear industry, so that then that talent is accessed and it can come in and be a positive influence and contribute to the various range of projects that are happening. Because I think sometimes the nuclear industry isn't always as good as explaining the variety of things and the variety of skills that are open to so many different people, and particularly those who might be interested in net zero and supporting those sorts of targets and understanding, well, what are the industries that I can work in that are going to help with carbon reduction and all those sorts of things. And nuclear is part of sort of the government plans and government strategy for carbon reduction, and as part of attaining sort of the net zero targets. But if you were to go and ask someone on the street if they know that, and if they think their skill set potentially could come and work in the industry, I think it would be a very mixed response. So for me, inclusive growth would be being able to reach different people from different communities, different environments, who maybe are working in completely different industries at the moment, who can come along and realise that actually if they did want to contribute in the nuclear industry, particularly, like I said, to net zero related projects, that they can do, that they realise they have the skills, the experience and the talent to come and be part of it as well.
Brilliant. I mean, I had a conversation once with the head of diversity and inclusion at HS2, and he said something along the similar lines that there's a skills shortage in the railway engineering industry. Over the next few years, a lot of people will be retiring out of the industry. We've got big projects like HS2 going on, and it was really important that we brought in new, fresh talent. So, yeah, you're not alone in that regard. Now, before we go, I know you have done some research and you've written a report on the back of your research around EDI in the nuclear sector. Could you just explain a bit about your research and where the person listening to us right now could get their hands on the copy of the report?
Yeah, I can do that. So back towards the end of 2022, we started a data collection exercise because what we wanted to understand as a team was, what is the picture around equity, diversity and inclusion within nuclear? Specifically wanting to find out, well, who is in the industry? Because the data point outside of understanding sort of from age and binary gender, there's not very many really solid data points that can actually give that true picture of who's actually working in the industry at the moment. And there's a lot of anecdotal stuff, a lot of conversational stuff. So I thought, okay, let's do a survey, let's see what we can find out. And then we've got a body of evidence there and at least some data we've collected to give us a bit of an idea as to who's working in the industry. So that was one aspect of it. But also the other aspect was to start to understand, well, what are perceptions of equity, diversity and inclusion in the nuclear industry? You know, how do people feel about it? What do they think about their opportunities for career progression? And are there any differences in terms of the different demographic groups as to how they feel about it? So we went, did a survey, we analysed the data, and we noticed that when you looked at the whole group numbers, it's quite a positive picture across a number of different factors and questions that we asked. But when you started to split out and say, well, what did just the men respond? What did just the women respond? What about our LGBTQ plus respondents? What about our minoritized ethnic group respondents? And we noticed there was some differences between some of the more minoritized groups versus the whole group number. And it just highlighted that sometimes that whole group number, it gives you a picture, but it may not give you a true picture depending on who you are and how you perceive the organisation. So it was pretty interesting to sort of dive into all of that and just see some of the different perceptions and day-to-day experiences people are having. So you asked me where people can get hold of it. They can go to the website www.idnuclear.com and they can find a copy of the report there.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, Monica, thanks ever so much for joining me today. It's been lovely to catch up with you. Thanks for all of the hard work that you're doing to create a more inclusive culture within the nuclear industry. And I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you so much for inviting me along.
And thank you for tuning into this episode of the Inclusive Growth Podcast with Monica and myself. Hopefully you've taken away some interesting nuggets of wisdom and information that you can apply to your own organisation. Even if you don't work in the nuclear sector, there's a lot of transferable principles that we can translate between different sectors. But if you do work in the nuclear sector, then I highly recommend reaching out to Monica and her team because they run a fantastic network. And it's always good to go along to their events, conferences, download their reports and things like that. So do check them out as well. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode, which will be coming out very soon. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Inclusive Growth Show. For further information and resources from Toby and his team, head on over to our website at milden.co.uk.